Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist. What's going on over there?
Just fixing up the microphone.
Is that a euphemism for something?
No, I'm not being corny.
Okay. Yeah, you're using the corn jokes because I spent the morning in a cornfield.
Yeah. No, my mic was tilting and I fixed it.
I like it.
I'm an engineer.
You're a
Audio
doer.
engineer.
You're a doer.
Yep.
And you know, when you go to get sober and you get in the world of recovery, everybody wants to know how you do it. And I'll tell you now, the ways we all do it are all a little bit different. There's some similarities in a lot of them. But one thing you cannot escape when it comes to sobriety and recovery is doing the work.
That's true. Yeah.
And that is the difference, because that's what this podcast was designed for, is to show you how many different ways up Sober Mountain?
A million billion different ways.
Whatever way gets you up the mountain. But the one thing that you've got to do is put one foot in front of the other and move yourself along.
In therapy, I have that conversation all the time. I primarily do cognitive behavioral therapy, which essentially is retraining your patterns of thinking and behavior. Mm-hmm. And guess what?
What?
They have to do the work.
They have to do the work.
Some people get frustrated and don't come back.
I have sometimes when I'm talking to somebody who's very religious, be it Catholic, be it LDS, Protestant, whatever it is, and they've got somebody in their family that's battling with addiction. I often tell them, I wish this was a disease that you could pray away.
Yeah.
But prayer is not going to make this go away. Prayer will give you hope. It will give you a foundation. It will give you some insight of where you need to go. But prayer alone is not enough to let this go away.
Yeah, that applies to all kinds of therapy as well. I mean, I think prayer can be helpful and inspiring to a person and help them feel supported and maybe motivated. But yeah, there's no substitute for doing the work. You
know what most addicts thought in their addiction?
What's that?
That it would magically go away.
Oh.
I mean, in all seriousness, that you would think, well, I'm just going to grow out of this, or one day I'll wake up and it won't be there, or I will just ignore it until it goes away. And that too is not
wish fulfillment. Yeah, just wishing.
That is not a good plan either.
That doesn't work?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, that'll end you up in rehab or dead.
Or dead.
And I'm knocking on the door to 5 years of sobriety.
I know, that's awesome.
Which is amazing. And I was talking to our guest. I'm going to bring him in right now. His name is Hymas, and he's 9 days away from 10 years?
Yep. Wow.
And before you got here, we were talking about the difference between 1, 2, 5, and 10 years of sobriety. Mm-hmm. And you were telling me when you hit your 5-year mark, what was your mindset?
So at 5 years, I was suicidal again. I felt like, so I was doing the exact same things that I'd done at year 1 and year 2 and year 3. And by year 5, that same stuff didn't work anymore. And so I was back at a place of misery, and I was white knuckling it and hanging on, can't drink, can't do drugs. And, which I'm super grateful for, because that's when I had a sort of break from, I'm going to create. Because we were talking earlier about I think a lot of folks think, okay, you're going to have to suffer and you're going to struggle through this thing and you're going to stay sober. And there are some days like that. But I would rather be high than being miserable in sobriety. And there is a third option, which is to be happy and content and fulfilled and sober. And that's what I'm shooting for. I'm no longer shooting for staying sober. I'm shooting for being happy, and the byproduct of being happy and healthy is that I stay sober. But I don't just stay sober anymore for the sake of staying sober. You know? But your
recovery has got to evolve, and it's got to be a lifestyle change. Sobriety is a tool to get you into recovery, but there's so much more into recovery than just being sober. And we were talking about it off air, is for that first year in recovery, Dr. Matt, I just wanted to get to the first year. You know what I mean? For some reason, something in my head, that was my goal. And I remember when I got to the first year, I was like, crap. Now what? You know what I mean? Because I made it the first year. And I told myself that, if I could do it the first year, I could do it. Mm-hmm. And, all of a sudden I got there and I was like, well,
Now what?
Now what?
Yeah.
You know, my life is a little bit better. I still don't have a license. I still don't have a job. I no longer have those tools to help me cope throughout the day. Mm-hmm. But I'm here a year sober, and I don't really know what my life looks like. And then I got 2 years. And at 2 years, it was pretty cool. And 3 years is awesome. And 4 is great. And I'm really looking forward to 5. But in those first couple of years of sobriety, everybody was championing you because they knew the battle that you were up against. Sure. And so people would check in on you, and people would kind of give you accolades and attaboys when they'd see you. They're like, oh my gosh, 18 months, that's so awesome. You're doing great. Mm-hmm. But you get into year 3 and 5, and we talked about this on the podcast last week. There's people that don't ever know me as a drunk. There's people that don't even know me.
New people in your life.
Yeah, you know what I mean? That they're like, well, you seem like a good guy and normal, and they didn't know about my past.
Right.
And so it's kind of a weird world to navigate. And so all of a sudden you start to get those, lengthier times in sobriety. And
well, Ryan brings up a good point that he was doing stuff that was working really well and then kind of hit a rough patch. Do you worry about that or think much about that? Because I think that's a pretty common pattern where people will have significant periods of years of sobriety, and then for whatever reason, maybe can't even tell why you hit a tough spot.
In the world of recovery, complacency. People get complacent.
Okay.
And so it sounds like Ryan, and I don't want to tell his story, but he did what he did for 5 years that kept him sober for the first couple. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden he gets to that 5th year and he's still doing this stuff, but nothing's changing. He's not evolving. He's just doing what he has been doing because it seems to have worked.
So recovery has to grow with the person over time. Is that what you're saying?
I think it has to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think your world
it's developmental in a way.
Your world evolves. You know what I mean? I'm not the same person I was a year ago. Certainly not 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And so you've got to evolve with it.
There's an old term that we used to use. I think it's probably in the non-PC bin now, but dry drunk.
Yeah.
Right? And what does that mean to you?
That means somebody who's sober but has never looked into or unpacked the stuff that was making him drink in the first place.
Like Ryan was saying, white knuckling it. That's kind of the picture I get. The image is like you're just barely hanging on, so you're kind of a grumpy, unhappy, unfulfilled person.
I just did a post on Facebook the other day, and on the outside looking in, most people would see an addict and go, here's the problem. It's alcohol, it's drugs, it's meth. That's your problem. And you can't do that. You can't. And they go, yeah, that is a problem. But it was a solution to someone's problems. And now it's become a problem.
Now it's become its own problem.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so a dry drunk would just get sober and would not
fix the problems that caused the
or even look into them or talk to a therapist or kind of unpack that baggage that got him to where they were.
That's why I like the term recovery better. I think that's why we named this show Project Recovery, is we know that there are people who are sober but living life in recovery, like Ryan is talking about, trying to be happy, productive, and living your best life, not just white knuckling it day to day.
Well, I've said it every week for the past 4 years. It's about addiction, but much more, it's about recovery. And it's what we do afterwards. And so how do we help people go from the addictive state to sobriety to living a fulfilled life in recovery?
What have you done? So, like we were just talking about alcohol, you've told the story before where the therapist said, alcohol's not your problem. And you're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. And he said, no, it's the solution to your problems, and it's become its own problem. So now that you're coming up on 5 years, what problems have you addressed that you were treating with alcohol? Have you gone back to that level?
I haven't gone back to the level that people ask me all the time, because I'm not a 12-step guy.
Right.
I consider these weekly sessions very crucial to my recovery. It helps me see the world through different addicts' eyes. I gain a lot of insight from what our guests say. I learn a lot from you, whether you believe it or not. I mean, I'm very fortunate that you're my friend. And what you say, I listen and I take to heart. And what a lot of people don't know, and I'll tell you just right now, Ryan, at the end of this podcast. We're going to walk you out the back door. We're going to give you your validation. We're going to say, hey, he was a great guy. That was a great guest. And then me and Dr. Matt will sit in the parking lot for 10 minutes and kind of talk. Yeah. And we'll find out about each other. And to me, those are mini therapy sessions.
No, they're fun.
And I enjoy them. But I am coming up on something that I've got to figure out what my life looks like. And, you know,
the 5 years, you feel like that's a reflection?
Yeah, I think that's when I need to look back. And, you know, for me, being in the gym is crucial. I've been at least 4 to 5 days a week, every week since I've been out of rehab.
Oh, I know. You're
so that's
dedicated.
That's crucial to me. That makes me feel a lot better. That's where I get in my head. In my interactions with my children, my girlfriend, my ex-wife, and my parents, I try to manage expectations. I don't try to always say yes to people, but I feel myself slipping into it.
I think you've changed a lot. That's my observation. The Casey before rehab was a mega people pleaser.
I would say yes before you even asked me a question.
Yeah, and so it looks in your direction. You're like, yes.
Yeah. What do you need? What was it need?
And I think that made you popular, but I think it put a tremendous amount of pressure in your life that I think you've done a great job working on.
I was just talking to my girlfriend last night at dinner. It was just me and her, and every weekend. For the past 18 months, I've had something going on, whether it's me working at a sporting event, a golf tournament, DJing a wedding, talking to a group of people about addiction. I've always had something planned. And she goes, you haven't done anything, for us or in a long time. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, you've got to get better at telling people no. Mm-hmm. But
I think she has a point.
No, she does.
Right.
I know she does.
I also know that you mentioned the gym, you mentioned this show, and I think the third thing you haven't mentioned is you're always involved in the recovery community in different ways, doing different things.
Yeah.
Including roping me into a golf tournament this morning already.
A golf tournament, and then I'm speaking at a thing on the 12th, and I'll go, and to be honest with you, I bet 20 minutes of my day at the gym is talking to somebody about the podcast, about a loved one, about somebody who's in addiction, and just trying. And that's the kind of stuff that keeps me grounded and keeps me in the loop. But I do need to work on myself a little bit more, and I've got to evolve.
I think that I know I threw that at you.
No, it's fair,
and it's a total personal question.
It's fair,
but I think we nailed at least one of them. That is learning to say no more. Mm-hmm. I think you are much better at that, and. Since you're always willing to share your personal story, that's kind of an illustration of anybody who's listening to this podcast who feels like they're just white knuckling it. Think about that. Think about what have I changed in my life that I might have been a problem that was influenced by my drinking or drugging, right? Like I was using my substance abuse to try to deal with stresses about relationships, finances, personality issues, anxiety. Yeah. A lot of it is the mental health piece goes hand in hand, and people who, struggle with substance abuse often have untreated or poorly treated mental health issues. And so that can be a focus once a person gets sober is, can I really finally make the commitment to get in and get the help I need, which I know can be a challenge.
We've had a lot of addicts who have been on this podcast who got into their addiction because of a trauma. Mm-hmm. And
finally, that's scary to go in to get trauma-specific therapy. I know that's hard for people, but it's so valuable.
I was in recovery, and we would sit down in the family room, and people would be talking like, I got to talk to my therapist today about my trauma. And I've been avoiding this. I thought if I just got sober, I wouldn't have to deal with that.
Right.
And a good therapist will tell you, no, eventually it will come back. Yeah. We've got to.
And if you don't deal with it, you're, I think, more likely to relapse, right? Because the trauma is demanding something from you.
But for 20 some odd years, people have been numbing out the trauma, avoiding the trauma, running from the trauma, and they just want to get sober. And then all of a sudden you go, hey, we got to go back and revisit that trauma. Yeah. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun.
Good. Yeah. No.
You know what I mean? It doesn't put you in a good headspace, but in order to get in a good headspace, we're going to have to address that.
I have so much admiration and respect for the patients that I have and that other people have that I know go in and they face those trauma histories and they work on them. That's tough stuff, but it pays off big time. And it can help you move from just being sober into recovery, I believe.
I love that. Well, we've got a wonderful podcast for you today. Our guest today is Ryan Hymas. I first met him when he was a janitor at the radio station over 25 years ago.
Yeah, at
Citadel.
Citadel, yeah. Well, that's where I first did radio. Was,
for 107.5 The End, Cable, K-Bear.
I think it was even 101.9 before,
and B98.7. Then he moved into a world of addiction, and right now he's working for I Am Recovery, and he's on the Sobriety Foundation board. We're going to find out his story coming up next. You're listening to Project Recovery. Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist and a therapist.
That's true.
And real quick, before we get to our guest, Ryan, talk about the importance of seeing a therapist early on in your addiction, because even people are questioning, am I an alcoholic? Do I have this? I mean, a therapist can get you pointed in the right direction to get you help.
Yeah, I mean, a good therapist can, and I think most try really hard. I think what kind of along the lines of what you just said, a lot of times people feel sort of confused, like, what's going on with me? Mm-hmm. And they might have a kind of a chaotic history. They may not really understand or know much about their family mental health history. They may have been using substances since early teen years to try to deal with it. And once you get sober, I think the next thing to do is say, okay, like, what's really going on with my mental health? Everyone has mental health, and no one's mental health is perfect.
But it seems in the years past, 10, 15 years ago, mental health had such a negative connotation to it. It was like, oh, he's mental, or it's mental. But now it seems in the past 5 years that mental health is something that we're striving for, is good mental health.
Yeah. Good mental health care involves both brain and behavior assessment, right? So it's not just, people used to say, oh, it's just in your head, meaning if you don't think about it, it'll go away. And it's like, well, it is in your head, so is your brain. It's part of your body. It's a real thing. It's biology, and how it affects our behaviors and patterns of thinking. And so figuring out, do I have trauma that I need trauma work for? Do I have an untreated anxiety disorder? It's not uncommon for me to talk with somebody and explain to them they have an anxiety disorder, and they'll look at me and say, well, I don't worry about things. I don't have worries. And I said, well, I know, but that crazy feeling you have inside all the time, and the fact that you avoid crowds and do all these things, that's anxiety. A lot of people don't understand because they haven't had fair, helpful
diagnosis.
Treatment.
And so let me ask you this. When people are avoiding big crowds or avoiding certain things, is that a form of self-medicating where they go, hey, look, if I avoid this, I don't get that feeling? And so,
treatment.
Yeah.
I usually say that avoidance is the hallmark behavior of anxiety. If you are a habitual avoider of anything, then you can be sure that thing you're avoiding, that situation, whatever it may be, is causing you stress and anxiety in some form. And the problem with that is when we avoid, we feel better. There's a relief that happens. The problem is that relief teaches your brain two things that aren't good. One is that because I feel better when I'm away from that thing, it must really be dangerous.
Yeah.
So your brain logs that as that's dangerous, and you get more afraid of it over time. And then you're like, well, and I'm going to do that again. That's the second thing. It teaches your brain to be a habitual avoider. The problem is, as we avoid things that stress us out, then they grow in significance and they become more and more stressful. That's how phobias are created. If you get nipped by a dog when you're little and you avoid dogs, your brain will start to treat all dogs as, dangerous.
Biters.
And so you might be phobic of dogs at some point, maybe, not always. But so there you go.
Wow. Isn't he great?
Yeah, and I would say, just to give a plug for therapists real quick, that I'm coming up on 10 years sober, and I still see a therapist weekly because I think it's an ongoing process. Like, me and my wife do marriage counseling because even, with 10 years sober, I've still got mental health issues, and I still have, incorrect thinking errors, and it's good to have a mediator in the room that can sometimes help me and my wife translate what we're saying to each other and
navigate.
Yeah, because it is, like we were saying, it is an evolution, and I think having a therapist, somebody that's outside the situation to help you if you're willing to look at things through a set of different eyes, can be super beneficial.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you said that. I also think that all of us benefit when we go in and talk with somebody that has expertise in an area, right? So no matter what you're trying to do better in your life, if you can get some help, guidance from an expert, you're going to do better. And isn't it funny that probably the most important things in our life, we wait until there's a crisis to get that help, right? You were talking about marriage therapy. Well, there's not a whole lot more if you're married that's important to setting a healthy tone to your life than having a good relationship with your spouse or your partner. And I think that that's something that unfortunately people, don't see the benefit of. Also in your own life, like how to manage your patterns of thinking and behaviors, your history, your tendencies. Having a coach for that would be great. We had coaches in sports growing up or music lessons or whatever you did. It's kind of funny that our culture usually waits until there's a crisis. But when you don't wait and you go on a regular basis, it's refreshing.
Well, it's because helpful. We grew up in a barbaric, archaic time where it was like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Which is a dumb saying. You know what I mean? We can still make it better, but then we're like, wait till it's broken and then we'll fix it.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's the old medical model applied to psychology. And I think even the people in medicine recognize that the medical model works great for medicine, not great for psychology.
Preventative is what we want.
Absolutely.
That's it. So the voice you're hearing is Ryan Hymas. Ryan, almost 10 years?
Yep, August 12th, I'll have 10 years. And
it's coming right up.
Yep.
Before we find out how you got there, let's start at the beginning. So where does the story of Ryan begin?
So I grew up in Centerville, so just north of Bountiful, up on the mountain. Nice little happy childhood of, a lot of people do come through the doors of recovery and addiction with trauma and stuff. I had a sweet little childhood. We'd go camping, back when we were in the 4th grade, our parents would say, see you in a couple days, and we'd go up the mountain. And I've got a 4th grader now, and that seems insane, but but it was, we lived outside, and I had good friends.
Are you an only child?
No. So I'm the only one. I had a great grandpa who was an alcoholic, but I'm the only one currently in 5 generations other than him that has struggled with any addiction, which I think I've got some nieces and nephews that'll come up and hopefully I'll be able to walk them through it a little bit. But I didn't, when you're talking about mental health, I didn't hear the word anxiety until I was maybe 18. I was born in 78, and it was always, I had good parents, but it was always like, stop it. Like why are you avoiding things? And I would, probably have little freak outs as a kid, which I see in my kids. But now my kids, they're in therapy, and they're my 6-year-old loves going to therapy because he's able to talk about his, pet bee that died. And so they have an awareness that we never had as kids about, this is something we can discuss, because I just thought, forever when I was a kid, I just remember thinking I was weird, which I am, but I thought I was broken, and I thought there was something wrong with me, because everybody else, when I would have little fits about things that I look back now thinking, okay, you were having an anxiety attack about doing stuff, and then just to be told, which, it's not my parents' fault, but to be told, stop it, get in the car, we're going, and there was no discussion about why are you freaking out. And so for my kids, it's been super beneficial that we can have conversations about their anxiety, their depression, my kids, I heard my 8-year-old talking to her friends the other day about heroin, which was she was selling it. I'm just kidding. But no, but they were discussing harmful things, and they were discussing healthy things as well about, my kids understand exercise and meditation and they have some other tools in their bags that I never heard about those tools even. And if we did hear about them, we would have made fun of them when we were kids, because it would have been, you don't tell people that you have any sort of mental health issues, which the world is changing for the better in a lot of ways. There's, I just saw there's a 911, but for mental health.
Yeah.
I don't know what the number is.
988.
988?
Yeah.
Yep. So call 988. So, which is again, so we can have some preventative care and get on top of stuff instead of waiting till you have to call 911 because somebody's mental health is cracked and they've, done something horrible. So now you call the mental health line 988 and they can try to direct you into some resources so that you can get some help before it gets broken.
And we have things like the mobile crisis outreach team here in Salt Lake.
Safe Utah app.
Safe Utah app. You're absolutely right. It's a different world, and kids do have different conversations. Like I've overheard my kids have similar, conversations that have to do with what's healthy, what's unhealthy. They talk about skills. They talk about anxiety, stress,
depression,
all the things that we would have not probably even known how to talk about, but certainly would have made fun of.
I can imagine if I was a kid and I told my dad, and I love him, and he's the most wonderful human being I know, and said, "Dad, I'm depressed." He'd be like, "You're 8. You're not depressed.
Go outside."
Yeah. Call me when you're 45 and you got a house payment. Don't talk to me about depression. You know what I mean?
Totally.
But that's how we grew up. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, you're 8. What are you depressed about?
I remember my dad saying stuff like, "Well, is it bleeding?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "No." He's like, "All right,
Yeah,
like,
you're
you're
good.
fine."
Yep.
So, Ryan, when did you first try alcohol or drugs?
So never had a drop of anything until I was just turned 19, which
Can I ask?
Yeah.
I usually don't interrupt because I know you're forming a thought there. But I wanted to go back just to something you mentioned. Growing up with anxiety, but nobody really knowing about it, and you feeling weird or different. How do you think that affected your teenage self-esteem, or what we call identity?
I mean, I look at the pictures of myself during my teenage years. There is like a noticeable nervousness on my face in all the pictures. Like I see the other kids I'm in the picture with smiling, and I can just tell that kid is super nervous, which is why, like, when I hit 19 and had a drink, and all of a sudden, I mean, that is the first time that I felt whole and good.
You almost said normal.
And fixed and normal.
Right. And
Totally.
I think that is valuable to that you almost said normal. You use better vocab afterwards, but like the normal part is like, that's the adolescent. I just want to feel normal. I just want to be like everybody else.
Yep.
And that's powerful if on a still picture from the 80s you can see on your face the anxiety. That is powerful. And that's why I asked about like self-esteem or self-confidence. I was going to say I believe, but it's not belief, it's a knowledge. I know that when a person grows up with just naturally inherited anxiety or depression, it negatively affects how they think about themselves, and they do feel not normal. They don't feel like everybody else. And that's why that first drink or smoke or whatever a person has, they finally feel normal and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I found the solution."
Yep. Did you find confidence? Did you find the things you were looking for in alcohol and drugs?
Totally. I mean, 100% the solution to my problems. And I remember the first drink, so me and my friend got drunk. We didn't know how much to drink. We shared a bottle of vodka, a big bottle, and
that's probably enough.
And he goes over here and he's puking in the corner, and I was standing there, and I audibly said, "I'm going to do this every day." It was like that was a done deal.
Transformative.
Because it really was. It was. We were running up and down the street. There was snow. I was sliding on my face in the yards. Neighbors were coming out. I was running up and talking to the neighbors. Like, I felt free all of a sudden whereas I would have never even made eye contact with some neighbors, I was chatting it up with them and excited to be out. And the other trick to that is when you've been told, the only thing we were told about alcohol and drugs growing up was like bad. If you do this, it was so tied in with religion as well. That was, you're definitely not going to the best place if you dabble in alcohol and drugs. And the only people that do that are super, super bad. It's bad.
Yeah.
And so then when my first time I have a experience where I feel good, it negates everything that I was told, because I thought, like, they're wrong. Like, they're They just don't know.
Do they know about alcohol?
Yeah, they've never done it.
This is my savior.
Totally.
This is helping me. This is bringing me out of my shell.
Yep.
This is the first time in my life at 19 that I feel normal, that I feel alive.
And that's why we have to have more sophisticated conversations with kids, because you're right. Almost all of us grew up with just being told, don't do drugs, don't drink alcohol, it's bad, and the religious part, it's wrong.
Yep.
Right? And so if that's all you teach them, there's a reason alcohol is popular.
For sure.
Right? Because it makes a person feel a certain way. And so it's not even logical to tell kids it's just bad. We have to go way beyond that conversation and say, well, here are the reasons why you wouldn't want to do it. But yeah, people do it because in the beginning, it feels kind of good. And I think it's scary as a parent to admit that to your kids. Like, there's a reason people smoke weed. There's a reason people drink alcohol and use other kinds of drugs.
Well, people just avoid the conversation because inevitably someone's going to go, well, did you drink? And they're not ready to have that conversation. Did you try marijuana? And they don't want to have that conversation because then they admit that, you know what I mean? And so,
but it's easier to have that conversation if you don't break it down to black and white terms, good or bad. You can say, you know what? If you were to drink alcohol, talking to your kid, you'd feel good for a little while. But then let's talk about the progression of what happens when people drink, especially, the next day and how you feel. And we have to talk about addiction. And this is where families have to know their family history. Like, do we have a family history of addiction? Here in Utah, if you have a family history of people who have never drank because of religious views, then you might have to admit we don't really know what our addiction history could be. We might be carrying that gene of addiction and not really know it.
Well, let's see how it progresses.
You know how you can tell, though?
Yeah.
How many times they went to swig that day, or how many sodas they drank,
for sure,
or the sugar that they eat. So, the addiction potential does come out.
So how did it progress? At 19, you had your first drink of vodka. You felt free. You felt alive. Did that progress pretty quick?
So we started, me and my same friend, we were in a band playing music, and so we really quickly after that started smoking weed. It was actually, part of it was based on, I wasn't going to go on a mission, on an LDS mission, right? And I'm the only one in, again, 5 generations that hasn't gone on an LDS mission. And so,
why didn't you want to go?
Because I wanted to play music. That was the whole thing. It actually didn't have a lot to do with beliefs or anything like that. I'd started in bands and was playing in bands, and I wanted to keep playing in bands, and that was what I thought my end goal was. And so when I made that decision, I'm not going so that I can play music, it also was filled with, the shame that I brought on the family name was like, my grandmas were just like, so disappointed. Everybody was so disappointed in me. And so not only did it make me, that first drink of alcohol, but then I went all the way off the cliff because I was already going to hell in my thinking. I remember I went to a church guy in our neighborhood and talked to him about, I did this because I felt this shame, and he's like, I'm just so disappointed in you. And then he left the room, and then it was like, okay, I'm definitely doomed. I'm going to hell. I might as well, and I felt good when I did it. I'm just going to keep going and go all the way off the cliff. And so then we really quickly started, smoking weed. It started like we were trying to control it. Like every weekend we're going to smoke weed and get drunk. And then even my buddy that I started with, I started doing it every, 3 times a week. And he's like, you're going too fast. And I was like, I will just make another friend because this is the answer. And so I'm going to do this. And I really at 19 made the decision that I was going to go hard and fast and be done by, I had a plan of suicide from then. I thought if I'm still here at 27, that's when I'll do it. Like, in my head as a kid, that's when all the cool people went, was 27.
Kurt Cobain.
Hendrix and Joplin, Morrison, I think, was 27.
Yeah.
So that was, in my head, that was the plan, was, okay, and I really even thought, because I had no knowledge about I didn't know that your body could even recover. I thought, okay, I've put enough in here at 19, which is, crazy to think about now because it wasn't mass amounts from what I did over my, 30s as well. But I thought I've done enough damage. It's too late for me. It's too late for me to come back and have any sort of religious saving. My body is shot. I'm going to just go hard, fast, and then be done. And that was the plan for a long time until, and then it progressed into, I started doing mass amounts of LSD when I was 20, 21. I'd sit on my parents', I'm still at home, up on my parents' roof. One summer, I remember I took 300 hits of acid, and like every day, acid and drinking. So I'm up on the roof with my guitar, and my parents still at that point, because we didn't talk about things, they didn't know what to say. They had no reference point for a child doing drugs and alcohol. It was like
on top of the roof. Totally.
So it was like, hey bud, you doing okay up there? But nobody said anything. Eventually I think my parents sat down and said, look, we believe that you're doing, stuff that we don't know about, drugs and alcohol, and you can't live here anymore. When I was, I think, end of my 20s or 20 or 21, and they said, we need you to, start looking for a place to go because it's not going to fly like here. And that was the only conversation, though. It wasn't, and again, like, man, I got the best parents, just to clarify, super loving. I mean, I couldn't have made it out without them, 100%. But back then they just had no reference point.
Most parents of that generation had no, even if they had a reference point. And I get that for your parents, it was sort of like this double blind. I don't know how to talk or think about this, but no fault of their own. Generationally, I don't think parents were equipped to have those conversations. Totally. Even if they had a reference point, how do you bring it up? How do you talk about it? How do you not use shame and have a real conversation? I think that's a generational improvement that's happening, to where you're talking about your daughter having these mature conversations. Think about by the time she's an adult and has her own kids, the different types of dialogues, the sophistication and being able to talk about these sorts of things will be tremendously beneficial to her kids, right? Yep. But yeah, my parents included are great people, but we didn't have that conversation because I just don't think parents knew how or thought about it really.
Yep, 100%.
So your early 20s, your parents say it's time to find your own place to play guitar on the roof.
Yep.
And so where did you go?
So I went to Bountiful, closest city next to me, so got a studio apartment. My folks were still helping pay. I was working. That's when I started working at the radio station as a janitor, and so it was the only job I could keep because I would go in at 1 a.m, and that's when I started doing. I think that was the first place I started doing cocaine was with the DJs. I'm not gonna say his name.
I was
gonna say his name.
Yeah.
With some of the K-Bear DJs, and so I go in at 1. Do coke till 2:30, run around like a crazy person with a garbage sack, trying to get the garbages as much as I could, and like pick up the main. I mean, I was a horrible janitor for. It must have been 9 years, I think, that I did that, and that was the only job I could keep, and I made, a couple bucks to put towards rent. I think my parents still helped me because they didn't want me to come home. So they'd help me with the rent, and really it was like, I had a couple bucks that I would spend on drugs and alcohol, and that was it. It was a real simple existence of just getting drunk every day, and then going at 1 a.m. and drunk driving and out to the radio station, and then so I did that for a long time and played music, and which still was going to be, that was my thing, and so I was playing music, and I go play shows, and then it sort of progressed into. But at that
point, so that was your early 20s. Yeah. Were you married? Did anybody in your family go, "Hey, Ryan, you probably ought to take a look at this," or is it still just kind of we don't talk about it?
Yeah, we still didn't have any conversations until. So then, when I was 25, I got married to a girl, and anyway, we were both alcoholics, and that went poorly. And so then we were separated. We were back in my parents' house for a year and a half. And then I moved out and was I started working for this insurance company, and they gave me a key. So I would leave for the insurance job during the day, and then I would come back at night and sleep in the basement in this little crawl space I'd made under a desk in the basement. And my ex-wife, she lived at my parents' house, just closing the door and getting drunk every night as well. And so then the first time we really had a conversation was when my ex-wife, she decided she'd had enough and she was going to rehab. So she went to rehab down in Arizona, and said she wanted me to come down for family week, So I flew down there, went to the family week for one day, where I then got locked up in a psych ward down in Arizona because of, I think I'd made some suicidal comments, and there was some actual professionals around that were nervous. So they put me in the psych ward where I had to stay for about a week. And then when I got out of the psych ward, I just flew. I knew the marriage was done, and so I flew back home, and that's where I had my first intervention. Was when I got back home, and they said you're either walking out the door or you're going to treatment. And so I think I started.
Was that your family?
Yeah, my family, and they'd hired somebody, which
like a formal intervention.
Yep,
Okay.
Like a formal intervention, which was really my only one. I think they kind of gave up on those after the first one, but so then I agreed to go to treatment. So then I went to my first treatment, which was circ, which I think my parents thought if we put him in the nicest one, then it'll fix it and we can be done with this thing. And so I went there for 30 days, got out, made it 2 days, relapsed with some girls that had ran away from the treatment center. One of them overdosed in a hotel. She didn't die, but it was a horrible situation. So then they let me come back for an additional 45 days. And then I think I made it a week and a half after that stint, which, my parents asked me all the time, like, was that just a complete waste of money to send you in? And I 100% didn't take advantage of any of it, because I really had no interest. Even the whole time I was there, I had no interest in, I didn't think I was going to get sober. And I thought, I'm going to do rock and roll and keep going. I'm just taking a break right this second to get a little stabilized. But the thing that it did, was seeds were planted, because before that first rehab, I didn't know that it was a possibility to do better and to get, sober and to be happy, and I started seeing other people that were taking it seriously in the treatment, doing well and having just as big of a past as I had, and seemingly being happy, being clean. And so even though I went back out for another, let's see, how old was I? I was like 27. So I went back out for another 7 years and struggled, started to do more, but it did plant seeds of that there was hope, which was, so then when I was 35 and I'd progressed into a real opiates, which is, typically that's where it ends, is like opiates and heroin or meth. That's kind of the end of the road. So we
were talking about the hierarchy of drugs
Yeah.
before you walked in, and just kind of how they go. And I was curious because I never got into that deep of it. I said, "What's after heroin and meth?" And you said,
fentanyl and death is really the pattern.
Right.
And so if you're now at opioids, what got you into opioids? Was it a medical procedure, or was it just because you were progressing down the drug chart?
Yep. So I'd started buying a few here and there from some friends, and then really what happened, I think the statute of limitations is up, so I can probably share it. But I started working as a CNA, and in an assisted living, and they gave me the keys to the med cart, put me in charge of all these folks' meds, and you know, and I don't say this I'm proud of this way, because a ton of people were hurt by my behaviors, and I took everybody's meds for a long time, and you know, and at that point, you know, I knew after the first rehab, it was like I knew I had a problem, but I couldn't quit at this point. I mean, especially with the opiates, it was, you know, you're going to get sick if you don't. So it was every day I'd go to work, take what I could from the med cart. The other girl that was working with me, she got busted doing the same thing. And so, you know, I helped, you know, I was like, yeah, look what she did. That's terrible. And I was doing the same thing. And so then I tried to stop, and I couldn't stop with the opiates. So then I switched jobs, went to the hospital, because I thought there'll be a nurse there, and I won't have the meds. The nurses will have the meds. I'll detox, and I'll be able to quit. And it turns out everybody brings their pills to the hospital with them. And it got to the place where I'd bring their bags in for them, and I could drop their bag on the floor, and I could hear if I heard that little shake, then I knew that there was pills in there. And so then I would come back, help them into the bathroom, and take all their pain pills. And you know, and then I tried to quit that job because I knew I couldn't quit, and I knew it was just a matter of time until you know, I was going to go to prison for this stuff. It was.
Did you ever get busted?
No, not for that stuff. I mean, I got 2 DUIs, a marijuana arrest at this point, couple drunken disorderlies.
It's pretty interesting, isn't it, how that addict brain works, where you become pretty crafty and sophisticated.
Oh, yeah.
Like you said, dropping the bag, you could hear the rattle, and that conditioning makes us be very crafty in how we get that need met. And what I mean by conditioning is, you know, just like for Casey, it might have been the sound of a beer can opening, that sound. All of a sudden, your brain reacts to, oh, we're going to get some, and it starts that process. So I would assume for you, when you heard that rattle, you were like, okay. Yep. And it's not just a thought. It is a physiological reaction that's so powerful that it'll make you take risks and do things that you would have never thought before you would have done. In fact, I like the fact that your brain was thinking, oh, if I go to the hospital, that'll be safe for me to work there. Yeah. And lo and behold, you found a way around that. And it's just interesting how that brain, if it could work that way on other things, which it does for some people, they get in recovery, and then that brain of theirs starts doing positive things. It's pretty impressive.
Oh, so does the opioids progress to heroin?
Yep. So, I mean, cheaper. You know, that's the whole thing is, so I quit the hospital trying to stop myself. I was a mortician's assistant, which was a trip. And it turns out,
so matter of fact, I mean, it was just a trip.
I thought that was going to be my jam. I was sewing up people in the basement, and that was a weird one, but, driving the hearse around town, which I loved, but, again, trying to stop myself. And people would come to the funerals with benzos, you know, in their bags to try to deal with these deaths. And again, not in a proud way. I hurt a lot of people. But I would tell them, yeah, you can put your bags can go over here in this safe place. And then I would go through their bags and take their Adderall and their benzos and any pain pills and anything. I mean, anything I could find. I mean, I started going, I'd go with my parents, I don't think the neighbors will listen to this, but I'd go with my parents down to church. They go down on Sunday, and I'd look for the person that had like a broken leg in the meeting, right? And so then I would go back in my suit, go to their house, knock on the door, and make sure they're still at the church. Nobody answers around back, and now I'm breaking and entering into houses, which is like so far beyond anything that I thought that I would do. I mean, I never stole and I still, you know, I never broke into a house and took money. It was only, I had to have the opiates and the benzos, and that I had to have
that
it.
Addiction is so powerful that, you would do things that you would never normally do.
So now you're
Good
on
people with
heroin.
those, yeah.
On the podcast, we usually talk to somebody about their rock bottom that gets them into the world of recovery. What does your rock bottom look like?
So what happened was, I was working at the mortuary doing heroin, trying to be as functioning. So I got married. I met my wife Erin, and we got married. I was trying. I mean, I looked about as functional as I had in a long time when I was just doing the opiates, even though there was all this behaviors of breaking and entering and stealing, but it was about as functional as I had looked in a while because I wasn't drinking as much. So my wife thought, okay, like I know he's not doing great, but he's at least with opiates. I'd wake up, take a handful of opiates, and then I'm working and I'm like showing up and being a little bit happy because I'm high on opiates. But with alcohol, it was like whenever I went into the binges with that, then it was, just destruction and falling over. And so I looked like I was doing better. I think everybody kind of thought, oh, he's doing a little bit better. And I would, even abuse the word recovery. I'm doing really well. I'm in recovery, I would tell people. And then I would just do tons of pain pills. And so we had my wife was going to have our first kid, which I told myself the whole time, like she was pregnant, this has to stop. I knew it had to stop. And I knew it was just a matter of time until either I stopped or the universe stopped me and something was going to happen. And so, I told myself, I'm not going to be a drug addict dad. Like that's not, I'm going to be clean. I'm going to be like kids have always been, I love kids. Like my kids are, everything and I like everybody. But, anyway, so had my kid, couldn't stop. I was doing a taper. I had all my pain pills lined up. I was like, okay, after the birth, I'm going to do like 3 a day. The birth was so horrific, with my wife, just a horrible 30-hour labor with all, like blood on the ceiling situation. And so yeah, that's too much. But so horrific that I end up going in the bathroom and taking my whole taper that I was planning on laying out so that I could get off by the time when my baby was born. And so I'm just high at the hospital during the pregnancy, baby comes, I'm holding baby, and I'm fine. At this point, I'm just happy to be here. And my wife is, doing horrible. So then my wife, they send us home, with a baby, and my wife is bedridden for 2 weeks, couldn't get out of bed, in so much pain. I'm about to go into severe withdrawals, and I've got baby. Like she can't take care of baby right now. I've got baby, and I'm scared. Like I'm about to get sick. And I have to take care of this baby. So, they're giving my wife pain pills for all the medical stuff she just went through. I'm taking her pain pills. I took Tylenol, and I would file off the word Tylenol, and I would bring her in her pain pills, I would say. And I'd say, I would never take your pain pills. Who do you think I am? And I would give her the Tylenol, and she'd say, I don't know why they're not even taking the edge off this pain. And I'd call the doctors and say, this isn't working. You need to give her more. And they finally had enough with me and said, nope, like that's it. This should be enough for her to get through. So I'm just muddling through. This was the worst of it. And so, I kind of just kept going, stealing pills. And, so then at 4 months, when my baby's 4 months, and I'm, I doing heroin again because it was cheaper, it was all I could afford, and I didn't want to do the breaking and enterings anymore, and so I'm doing heroin, and I'm holding my baby. I still love this kid more than anything. I'm nodding off though while I'm holding baby. Luckily, my wife is like up again, and she takes over with baby, and like so then. I'm working at the mortuary. They fire me because I missed a funeral because I was drunk, which is frowned upon. Like somebody had to be there.
It makes sense.
They have to have standards.
Yeah. So they're pissed. They fire me. So at this point, my wife who'd been through the ringer with me for 6 years at this point, with varying degrees of terribleness, but mostly all terribleness for her. I mean, we had like we'd have some good days, and then we would have the terribleness again. But so she finally takes a stand, and it's because of my daughter that, she told me, like, when she married me, she just assumed, she knew she was marrying an alcoholic and a drug addict, and she loved me, saw something in there enough that she thought, we'll just do it. We'll make it. And so, but when I had my daughter, she finally thought, can't do it anymore for the daughter. So for Ruth, so she says, go to treatment, or you're not going to see your kid anymore. Takes my kid, moves out. I'm alone in this house. It gets real bad for a week. I overdose in the kitchen. My parents also, everybody got on the same page at this point. Like my wife, who I'd had really covering for me for a long, it's like any family party, can't come, Ryan's sick again. And, I manipulated it so that she enabled for me to help me cover up everything. And so, but at this point, she gets on the same page with my parents. My job fires me. My parents say, you're not coming to our house every 2 weeks to detox anymore. Because it was, I would get super sick. I'd go up there, detox. My mom, the sweetheart she is, she'd be bringing me down eggs in the morning, and she would sit. I'd have her like sit and play the piano for me when I was just writhing on the carpet, and I'd try. And then usually the most I could get was about 13 days. My wife says that was my limit on sobriety until this 10 years. 13 days was my max. And so, and I would always celebrate at 14 days, like I've got this, and then it would just get destruction again. So, but everybody got on the same page and said, you're not going to see your daughter, which was everything to me at that point. I didn't know if me and my wife were going to make it. I had to have this kid though in my life. It was, so I go to a rehab, which I didn't love this rehab. Their theory was, we're going to break you and then we'll rebuild you. I was already so broken at this point that I wanted a cigarette and a Snickers and a Diet Coke, which you couldn't have any of that there. So I went to Walmart and got those things, and then I thought, I've made a huge mistake. So then I called my wife and was like, I'm doing really well. I've just done 2 weeks in rehab. I'm coming home. Let's be happy. I did it, and I'm doing really well. And my wife, this was like a pivotal decision that really changed everything, was that my wife said the deal was, she held her ground, which she'd never done. She held her ground, said, you complete a treatment program or you don't get to see us. And I said, well, I'm coming home. And she said, come home. There's heroin still out in the closet. I know there is. If you come home, I'm calling the cops. And I was, didn't know what I was going to do, rode the tracks all day up and back until it was night. And finally, Aaron called the Chateau up in Midway and talked to my parents, and it was like, okay, everyone said, this is it. This is the last, out of all the last chances we've had, this is the last shot. You make this work and you stay for the full program, or things are going to be very different, and you're going to be taking a real hard road. And so, and at this point I was, homeless, like riding the tracks up and forth. I was like, I'll do it. So I go up to the Chateau, which is really where everything changed. I surrendered is what happened. Like I just thought, okay, like everybody is holding this boundary with me. I resigned myself. Like this has to happen. And I knew that I knew in my soul that I wanted it to stop, but I hadn't been able to. And so I go to the Chateau. They had a real loose and loving program back then, where it was like, the owner, Danny, was like, come in the office. I want to hear your opinion. Nobody had talked to me with respect or like a human in a long time at that point. And he talked to me with respect. He said, here's some 12 steps if you want to take a look at it. And I thought, like, if nobody's going to make me do this, then I'll do it. And so I started reading there was a little 12-step guide. And that was my first experience with really getting into AA. They would take us, like they do in treatment, to the shack up there, and you do AA meetings. And so I did the 12 steps up there. I had a couple just spiritual experiences where my daughter actually landed in the hospital just for some, it was like dehydration, some other things. But anyway, they told me I'd been up there for a month, and at this point I was saying I want to stay, which is really where the change had come. It was no longer me saying I need to get out. I was resigned and said, like, keep me safe from myself from as long as I possibly can. At this point I was like telling my parents, I'll pay, like, I'll do a payment plan, whatever I got to do to get as long as I can in here, because I started finally feeling, I started seeing hope again. I started feeling, and I started liking it. I started having fun, like with, you're in rehab, and it was, you got other people. I'm still friends with a bunch of the folks that I was in rehab with, and I just, anyway, we had a real bond up there. And so anyway, my daughter's in the hospital. They call me and say, you got to go to the hospital. We don't know what's happening. It could be bad. So I get in the car, and that was a pivotal drive for me on my way down to the hospital. And I thought, what am I going to do if I get there and she's gone? She's like that. She was the reason why I'm doing this. It was the only reason. I didn't care enough about myself. I didn't know if me and my wife were going to make it. That was the only reason I was in treatment. But I made a decision on that drive that was, no matter what happens with this kid, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep trying to stay sober. And I went down there, and it was the first time where, instead of manipulating the situation and saying, I can't come back to rehab. I've got my daughter in the hospital. I stayed for one night with her, slept, with her in those little crib things, and in the morning I told my wife, I have to go back. Like, I have to get back. And that was a pivotal change for me of actually, it changed from trying to see what I can get away with into what do I need to do? Yeah, I'm begging for a new life. And so I went back, finished up my treatment there. And again, I had a healthy fear of alcohol at this, I was scared to go, because I was starting to feel good, and I started to see, I saw a tech up there who was, working, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no resume cohesiveness at all, and so, but I thought, the only thing I know about is addiction. I've got a PhD in this stuff of what not to do. Saw this tech working, and I thought, I want to do that. That's what I'll just do the next thing in front of me. And so, I actually, I knew same thing you're saying, I knew I had to get a year, because most treatment centers back then wouldn't hire you until you had a year. And I knew I couldn't fake it either, because I knew that these guys would call me on it. If I was drinking on the side, like I'd always done, and trying to go to a job and tell them, talk recovery, I knew it wouldn't work. So that first year, that really got me to that first year, was thinking, I want to do that tech job that guy was doing. So all I did during that first year was I delivered pizzas, which at this point I'm 35, never delivered pizzas when I was younger or anything. I thought beneath me. At this point, didn't care. I just need a job to show up to every day, show up, and then go to meetings. So I went to 12-step AA meetings, and then I would come home and be with my wife and my daughter, Rue. And so, and that was all I did for the first year, and smoked a bunch of cigarettes. And that was, and met with my sponsor. It was that, I kept it as simple as possible. And I didn't go, I quit, I put music away, which was a big deal for me. Music was always the top of the list.
That was
making
your dream.
Music, that was everything. And so I put the guitars away for 2 years. I didn't touch music, which I think showed my family, okay, he's serious about this thing, because music never would have, it was always music, but it was so tied in to drinking and heroin and opiates. Every time I picked up the guitar, it was this would sound better with a beer, And so I could not distinguish between the two. And so I had to put it away. And so then I got my first year, and then and actually right before I got a first year, I got hired at Pathways, who the owner just passed away last week. Super, super sad. And Michelle, and I loved her, and she took a chance on me before I had a year, and I'm super grateful for it because she also changed my trajectory. And so I started working in it, which then that changed everything I'm certain that if I would have gone, back to the mortuary or back to insurance, if I was sitting in a place where I wasn't talking about recovery 24/7, I don't think I would have made it because I know my head starts to say, well, you can't do heroin, Ryan, but I'll bet you can take a Xanax, and no one here has any idea about chemicals, so you could probably do a Xanax and get away with it. And so, but the fact that I knew I had to show up in recovery, I knew I was going to get UA'd, as staff, and I also really started to enjoy helping. I mean, there's a lot of folks in recovery where you see this thing. I mean,
that sounds like you found a purpose.
Totally. And that's exactly right. Found a purpose and
a community and somebody you could strive and be with.
Yep.
And so now you're coming up on 10 years.
Yep. So,
and you got just one daughter?
No, I've got, so now I've got Rue's 10, then I have Scout that's 8, and then I have Basil boy that's 6. And so, and they're everything. And then all I did was I kept working in recovery and kept having kids and being with my kids, and then it's changed, like we were talking about. It's evolved because back then I thought that's the goal. Like I had everything, that was the goal, and then now what? And so the problem was that I kept doing. I did the same things that worked, which I think the first 2 years were helpful, but I didn't look at my medication. I stayed on the same medications that they gave me when I walked in the doors of treatment. And I feel like those same medications started to be counterproductive at 4 years. And I'd go to a meeting, I'd see my sponsor, I'd come home, and I was not filling the void with other positivity, with other things to fill. Like everybody's void is different. And like yours, you're saying, the gym is one of your pieces. One of the things that's really, I want to say is that the last 5 years, especially, I've realized how different recovery is for every person. And when I first worked in recovery, I used to tell everybody those first 2 years, I said, because of my experience and because of what I had been told when I stepped into the rooms, it was, you do the 12 steps or you die. That's it. Those are your options. Make a choice. And then the last really 5 years, I've seen so many people doing it so many ways, and I'll never ever tell anybody anymore that if what they're doing,
there's only one way to do it.
That if what they're doing is making them happy and healthy, and they're back with their families, and they're back with, I don't care if people are. Everyone is different. Everyone's biology is different. I know for me, I can't have a drink at dinner, but I also don't tell people that you'll never be able to have. Some people I've seen, some people that were meth addicts are able to drink responsibly. Like some people that, use medical marijuana. Some people are on Suboxone. I don't care what anyone does anymore. Do whatever. The trick with that is that, you do have to be honest with yourself sometimes. And
that's tough.
And sometimes it takes, thinking that you can do, thinking you've got, and people fall off, and people do die, from experimenting with different things. But it's not my life. Everybody gets to do their own life, and it's not just because somebody doesn't do it the way that I do it. I support anybody doing anything that gives them a good, healthy, happy life.
Talk a little bit about how art and creativity helps fill your void.
Totally. So that was, I started when this, I was 5 years clean, and I found myself suicidal again. I was trying to get out of a company that I'd helped create, and that I didn't believe in anymore. And so I picked up the guitar again, which was great because it was like a new thing. It was like, it was no longer tied into alcohol and heroin. It was a new, music got to be a new tool in the tool bag for me. And then, so I actually started doing, I'd always done the music, taking that break and then started again. But then I started doing polar plunges, which is a weird one, but
ice baths.
Yeah, the Wim Hof stuff.
Yeah, so we had a couple years ago. We'd go up to Tibble Fork. We'd cut a hole in the ice with a chainsaw. And we had treatment centers were coming in. We had about 150 people that would come, and we'd all jump in this little square ice thing, and that was working for me. That started filling the void, and the art and the music are really extensions of that. And the reason is that the same thing the polar plunge does for me, and the art and the music, and playing catch with my kid, all of those things are the same to me because every single one of them puts me here now. And has had to be my mantra for the last few years, is be here now, which is, a Ram Dass book, but it's, that is where I do good. I am, like right now, I'm totally good. I'm sitting here talking to some dudes with some weird chairs and it's great.
In the small studio.
In the small studio.
Yeah. But we love having you here. And that's what I love about it. I love how much you talk about your recovery and how passionate you are. And just so everybody knows, you're currently working with I Am Recovery.
Yep.
And I Am Recovery is an outpatient program.
Yep. So in Cedar Hills, we've got an outpatient. We do day treatment and night treatment, and then we also have a men's sober living right next door to the outpatient, which makes it handy if you don't have a car, and so to good place to start out. Place,
yeah.
And then we have a women's house down the road, and Jared Casey's the owner. Best. I know he's paying me, but he is the best guy in the industry. He lets me scholarship. He lets me help people whether they come to our program or not. And so
that's a beautiful thing.
It's so great. I don't have, I know there's a ton of folks in the industry that they got quotas and they got none of that. All I have to do is help people, which is, I think, the only reason I can stay doing it, because that's my one stipulation is I have to believe in where I'm at and what I'm doing, because there's a lot of ways to make money in this world.
Oh, there's some ugly side to recovery,
totally.
and there's some beautiful sides, and it's trying to find that happy medium.
100%.
And it sounds like you found a place that's allowing you to do
it's
that.
Great.
And then you're also doing artwork, and you're working on the board for the Sobriety Foundation. Tell me about that real quick.
Yeah, so the Sobriety Foundation falls right in line with, I'm trying to create a life that everything that I'm doing is the same ball of wax. The Sobriety Foundation, so I started creating work programs, and we had a call center with I Am Recovery during COVID, which was great because we were basically watching people online do COVID testing. But I love the work program because people have treatment, they have housing, they have employment where we actually give them a paycheck so that they can start to rebuild, and they have support during all of it, So
that's amazing,
and you see the retention rates go through the roof when you give people all those pieces. And so, I love the work program. What was I saying? What was the question?
Well, no, just all the things that you're doing.
Oh, so the Sobriety Foundation, yeah. So, I love the Sobriety Foundation because so many people, when they get to this place of having the willingness, they're ready to do it. Every bridge is burned. Like, family's been burned 36 times. And so the Sobriety Foundation steps in and helps people get their foot in the door to treatment programs. They help pay for up to 2 months rent in sober livings.
Which is a blessing.
So many people. I told Susan the other day, like, the ripples that I've seen the Sobriety Foundation and I Am Recovery make, like, you'll never see the end of it, because they're people that never would have had a shot are getting in the doors, and then they're getting back. I love it. They're getting back with their kids. Their kids are going to have different lives because of these groups, and so many others. There's so many good groups. There are good people out there doing good work, and I feel super supported by them. I started doing.
I'm going to let you take a break right now and a deep breath. Dr. Matt, real quick, what do you think about Ryan's story?
Oh, Ryan's a great example of, so many. I was talking to somebody else, a colleague of mine, about, like, they are asking, why are you doing that podcast? They didn't know. Mm-hmm. They knew I'd been doing it for a while. And I had a lot of answers because there's a lot of good reasons to do it. But along the lines of what I say, there's so many people. And prior to doing this podcast, I had no idea how many people are in our community doing good work, charitable work, helpful work to other people that are in recovery. I didn't know that. I didn't realize, like you talk about the ripples. And I think that's maybe my take-home message is those ripples don't ever end. And it's intergenerational, but it's also in this generation, in this time, here in our city, so many good people doing good things because they're in recovery. And it's just a great example of that. So thanks for sharing your story today.
Yeah, you're amazing. And we'd love to have you back on and talk more about all the things you're doing because although you've been going, I still think there's a lot to do. And I think you're going to be able to do it. If people want to find out more information about you, Ryan, and I Am Recovering, the Sobriety Foundation, where can they go?
I'm on the Book of Faces and the Instagrams, Ryan Hymas, and I give out my cell number all the time, but 801-652-9241, and I Am Recovery is 801-407-9998.
Is it R-Y-A-N or R-Y-E-N?
That's a good question, Casey. I'm glad that you asked that. A lot of people make that mistake. It's R-Y-A-N, H-Y-M-A-S. And I actually heard there is another one out there, so don't follow him. He's trouble.
There you go. Hey, thank you for stopping by, and thank you to everybody for once again allowing us to do what we do every day. Well, every week.
Every week.
Feels
but
like
you
every
can
day.
Listen to us every day.
Ryan can keep talking.
Yeah.
I probably will. I appreciate it.
Thank you for stopping by. Project Recovery, in case you forgot, is what, Dr. Matt?
It is still a KSL podcast, Casey.
He named his boy Basil.
I thought that was pretty cool. On Scout.
Yeah.
I like this. And what was the first one?
Rue.
Cool names.
You should pay attention.
Favorite part of having kids is naming them.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.